This story may be short, or it may be drawn out. I am recounting these events as I type, as it was, honestly, one of the most horrifying things I have experienced, and it brings me genuine stress to think about. This happened maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I live in southern West Virginia, and have for my entire life. The woods and mountains surround every direction you look, and nighttime is a darkness that you can never dream of unless experienced. I was with a friend. I'll call him Mark. Mark was at my house one evening, doing the usual things, watching UFC, playing Xbox, etc. It was extremely late when we finally got bored and decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke a joint. This is not a particularly long trail, but it is very dense in the woods that surround it, and it is easy to get freaked out when thinking of your surroundings. We finally get to about halfway into the trail, about 30 minutes in, where we stop, pack our joint, and stand on the trail to chill and talk. The forest is very alive tonight. There are always noises in the woods, but the amount of animal activity for the time was unsettling. At this point, it was probably past 1 a.m. This was strange and kind of eerie, but not alerting, as any sort of predatory animal in the area may cause a disturbance. We finish smoking and continue our walk, when almost immediately the forest falls dead quiet. And as soon as the forest goes quiet, there is a voice. It almost sounds like a mocking humanoid voice, shaky and uncertain, almost like an old children's toy, like the ones with the crackly speakers and robotic voice, if you know what I mean. This immediately sets us off. We bolt directly down the opposite length of the trail, but the sound does not gain distance. It doesn't get closer, per se, but no matter how far we ran down the trail, this eerie voice remains the same volume, going over and over with no quieting or stopping. At this point, I am convinced that we are in genuine danger, something I have felt very few times. Finally, after sprinting for who knows how long, we exit the trail, grasping for breath and almost at the verge of tears of how frightening this was. We begin to exit the trail, and about 5 minutes from the exit, there is a bone-shaking, heart-stopping, murderous scream from directly behind us. I know what a mountain lion sounds like. This was not an animal. This was not someone playing or watching a movie. This scream sent birds flying from nests and made my heart drop into my stomach. It was the most genuinely depraved and violent scream that I have ever heard. This is a true story that I have only told to maybe 3 people, all of whom seem to brush it off as false. I've never been a person to push for the existence of the paranormal or spiritual, but I genuinely believe I encountered something inhuman in those woods. I know I will receive questions such as what the voice was possibly saying, or to explain the area and what happened after. I genuinely cannot remember what the voice was saying, if anything intelligible. I don't know if I could understand it then, and I certainly can't recall understanding it after several years of blocking it out of my memory. All that I recall is that it was a fluctuating voice in pitch, shaking, almost just joining sounds together. After running from the scream at the end of the trail, we ran to the car, which was only about 5 more minutes from the trail, so we got there relatively fast from sprinting. Last December, I fled an abusive relationship and crashed with my friend Amy. She lives in an upper-level duplex that is quite small, and I stayed there for a while with my cat and dog, which was a lot, as she has a dog also. Next door to the duplex is a cute, old 4-bedroom house that is owned by Mark, a friend of Amy's who lives abroad. The couple who was renting out Mark's place bought a house and moved out. They suggested to me that it would be a great place for me to stay while I continued my apartment search. I was absolutely elated and agreed immediately. Mine and Amy's dog could play every day, and we could still see each other all the time. I was excited at the opportunity and paid Mark some rent, but mostly he just wanted to help me out with my situation and someone to house sit until he came home in May. I live in a very cold, snowy climate, so looking for a place in May is exponentially easier. Amy informed me the house had quirks and a creepy basement and told me if I ever felt creeped out in there all alone, I could come back whenever. She lived in that house for a couple years, so I took her word for it. When one of the tenants showed me the place, for the first time, I definitely felt something very off. I chalked it up to the weird layout, the draft, and the lack of sunlight in the rear of the house. Upstairs was 2 bedrooms and a bathroom in the middle. The front bedroom was warm and sunny, and the rest of the upstairs was very cold, noticeably colder than the rest of the house. Upon entering the back upstairs bedroom, it felt like a downward shift, like the energy in that room felt so strange, and I felt like I wasn't wanted in there, so I barely looked around and just closed the door behind me. The first couple weeks, nothing much happened, but I never felt at ease. I felt like I was being watched. I wrote it off as being easily spooked in a large house, and it was my first time living alone. I started having trouble sleeping, despite my room, the upstairs front bedroom, being the only place in the house I felt at ease. One night I decided to smoke some weed and watch a movie in the living room, kinda late at night. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to what I swore was someone running up the stairs and then slamming the back bedroom door. My dog looked startled too and ran upstairs and started growling at the closed door. No one was in there. I decided to lay off the weed, but some nights after that, I heard footsteps pacing in the back room. The next thing that started happening was while I was in the bathtub in the upstairs bathroom. My dog would lay in the doorway and just stare at the back room. Sometimes he would growl or bark at it. I would also come home to find the door open when I definitely shut it, or I would hear my cat meowing to be let in the room. On a couple occasions, I found my cat shut in the room. Also around this time, my bath towel went missing, and I looked absolutely everywhere for it. It began to take a toll on me. I started having nightmares every night, and I would wake up almost every night to my dog whining between 3 and 4 in the morning. I always felt like I was being watched, and the house felt so heavy. I told Amy about all this, and she confessed to me that she had some weird experiences in the house when she lived there as well. Her bedroom was the back room, and a couple times she woke up in a semi-dream state to a man at the end of her bed and began talking to it. She then woke up for real and saw texts from her roommate asking who she was talking to. She also would see things moving out of the corner of her eye, hear footsteps, and feel like she was being watched. She told me of an instance of seeing footsteps in the snow, going from the back door to the middle of the lawn and disappearing. One day, I was in the living room, hearing footsteps, and just felt so overwhelmed by the presence I was crying and decided to have a go talking to it. I said, "Hey, I know this is your house too. I'm leaving in a month. I've been through so much pain these past few months. Please just leave me alone. Please let me know you've heard me." Then the door upstairs slammed, and that was the last I heard for a while. My nightmares stopped. I started sleeping through the night and felt less of the presence. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped bothering even opening the door, until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mum, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was, while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mum's voice coming from the forest months later, while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it, despite the fact I'd seen my mum inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mum was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window, wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside, and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night, my mum didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors, and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being opened that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exercised, just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there, in the forest behind our house at night, but I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. I was once working as a receptionist at a 5-star resort that's about 45 minutes away from the city centre. Everyone who has worked in tourism and/or hospitality knows that there are certain periods during the year where it's busier than usual, i.e. peak season. This incident happened during peak season. The resort was overbooked and guests were checking into their rooms one after another at the reception counter. I was almost done checking in this nice, lovely couple when I saw this family of 5 standing behind them and tried to finish up the whole check-in process so I could assist the family that was next in line. You must be thinking that when I said family of 5, it's the parents and 3 kids, right? But it's actually 2 kids and 1 elderly woman, who at that time I assumed was either the husband's or wife's mother. Now, the resort's policy was to get the details of every guest that was staying in the resort, and it is for a good reason: safety. It's the same reason that all airlines are doing when they obtain their passengers' info. So I told the husband that we needed everyone's details, and he just said, sure, no problem. And of course, I was expecting 5 names on the registration form. By the time I realized there were only 4 names, the family were already at the concierge area to pick up their luggage and then left to go their rooms. I couldn't go after them as I was assisting another guest. Like I said, it was peak season, so all I could do was just watch them from afar, walking towards the elevators, then disappeared from sight. The whole time they were walking, the old woman just followed them from behind, quietly, but I didn't give much thought to it and went right back to assisting the guest that was in front of me. After the buzz had died down at around 4 p.m., I decided to ring the family's room to inform them that there were missing details. The husband came down to the reception alone, and I told him I needed the info of his wife's mother's info. This man just stood there, stared at me for what felt like a minute, and said, "It's only my wife and I and our 2 kids." Me, being confused, obviously said, "But sir, I saw there were 5 of you." At this point, I thought he was lying to avoid paying for a third-person charge for one of the rooms. They got 2 rooms, and 1 room has only enough amenities for 2 person. Same goes for the buffet breakfast that's included. He took another minute and asked me what did this elderly woman look like, to which I explained that she had grey hair and it was short, like a bob haircut. I also told him that she was wearing this red cheongsam shirt, similar to this, with a long black slack pants. Right as I told him that, he quickly took out his phone, frantically scrolled for a few seconds, and showed me a picture of the same woman in the same clothes, lying in a closed coffin that had a clear glass cover so you could still look inside. I just nodded slightly, and he said that it's his mother. She died unexpectedly a few months ago. I was, to no surprise, too shocked to say anything at this point, but somehow managed to mutter the words, "I'm so sorry for your loss, sir, and I'm so sorry about this." He just said it was okay, gave me a small smile, then left without saying anything. When they checked out 2 days later, we just pretended like that whole thing never happened. Luckily enough, the elderly woman was not there. Still get goosebumps just thinking about it till this day. I grew up in a very old house in the Midwest that my parents got for a steal. It was originally built as a hotel, and the seller was very motivated to get rid of it. Growing up, weird little things happened all the time. The typical malarkey that is easy to ignore for years and years. Footsteps, strange shadows, the feeling of being watched or followed, swearing you see someone in the room right as you wake up, the room in the basement that chills your blood every time for no reason, the occasional hard-to-explain moments. I moved to the West Coast in my 20s for school and self-discovery. During a visit from my family, my sister told me that they had met a ghost in the house. I was pretty skeptical, but my entire family backed her up. She was in her room, and her radio had been acting up. So just on the off chance, she said, "Okay, if you are a ghost, could you just please stop it?" The radio turned off. She waited a moment, and then said, "Wait, if you are a ghost, turn it on." And the radio turned on. After some experimentation, they devised a system of communication. Volume up was yes, volume down was number. The digital readout on the volume was 0 to 30, so 1 was A, 2 was B, 3 was C, and so on. If the radio turned off, then it was a sort of hard no or off-limits question. Through this system, the ghost had explained that he wanted to be called Jason. He had died in the house in 1905 at age 5 when he was sick, and he lived in the house alongside us with his kind mother and evil father. When they asked if he loved his father, the volume went to 0 and turned off. In fact, he refused most questions about his father. Apparently, he was the cause of the more malevolent experiences that people had in that house. I was definitely intrigued and went back home that year to visit for a chance to experience this for myself. However, when I arrived, Jason refused to interact with me. I would leave the table and the radio would pop on. My sisters would call me back and the radio would turn off instantly. He didn't want to have anything to do with me. As I thought about this, I remembered an experience I had before moving to the West Coast. I had been lying in bed one night when I felt a hand ruffle my hair playfully. I freaked out. I shot out of bed, turned on the light, puffed out my chest, and overconfidently yelled, "You don't know who I am or what I'm capable of. If you try that again, you'll regret it. Don't you dare mess with me." And then several picture frames on my desk flew off onto my floor belligerently. I stayed at a friend's house that night. One night on my trip after Jason refused to talk to me, I spoke out loud, "Hey, I'm sorry if it was you who I yelled at that one night. I bet you were trying to play or introduce yourself to me, and I got scared. I didn't need to be so mean to you, and I understand if you don't want to talk to me." The radio turned on. "Hey, are you the Jason I've heard so much about?" The volume went up. Did I tell it you that night before I left?" The volume went up again, and then went back down to a reasonable level. "I'm sorry about that. Can we be friends?" The volume went up again. It was incredible. He had introduced himself to several family friends as well. To prove he wasn't some sort of hacked radio, he would do additional tasks. He would ring our doorbell. He would push crayons around on the table. He even did a really incredible trick for us. You see, while asking about the logistics of being a ghost, he had volume upped that he could travel anywhere, almost instantly. To test it, we called up a family friend on the West Coast. This friend put out a newspaper on their kitchen table. Jason then visited them and came back to set the volume to the date of the paper. The radio turned off for a moment. Then seconds later, it set the volume to 17. The friend said, "So close." The paper was for the 18th, but Jason was not convinced. Volume up, volume down, 17, volume up, volume down, 17, 17, 17, 17. The friend checked again and apologized. "Oh, he's right. I misremembered. It's the paper from the 17th. He refused to answer questions about God or religion. He gave us a few answers that contradicted as well. He told us he didn't need to sleep, but he had told my sister a few months earlier that he did. One thing he seemed to know was how long he would be there. Through the volume Ouija system, he told my sister he would be around until her 28th birthday, then his family would move on to the next phase. At the time, this was a couple years into the future. Sure enough, we never heard from him after that. During his time with us, he would occasionally visit our dreams. We would have these extremely realistic dreams where a boy in a white hooded robe would say hi to us, ask to play hide and seek with us, or ask us questions about ourselves. Then he would confirm with my sister that he had visited us. He used the radio primarily, but in the final year, he got better at manipulating other electronics. He could make printers print messages. He could manipulate televisions. He even sent us texts in the last few months. My mother had texted me, "I see ooh ha ha," when I was back in the West Coast a couple of years after all of this. I texted her back, "Did you come out here to visit? Where are you?" But she was confused. She said she was in the Midwest at home, and her phone had no evidence of sending a text with that message to me. I texted back, "I think Jason sent me a message. Hi, Jason." And I got a reply, "Hi," again, not from my mom. My sister even once got a call with a picture of Obama and the caller ID saying Mr. President. But there was nobody there when she answered, and apparently no callback number. The radio confirmed with a volume up that Jason was goofing around. It was a wild few years with that crazy kid haunting our devices. My family still has that radio out just in case, but it hasn't turned on in years. My sister is now well into her 30s. I know this will be met with a lot of skepticism. Even I was very skeptical until I was able to meet him myself. This is a long one, guys, but it's worth the read. Really freaked me out at the time. If anyone has a solid idea of what this was, or if they have had a similar experience, I would love to hear it. This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped in my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer, with a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go find it and put it out of its misery. Think nothing of it after that, and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep, so I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, and I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal walk drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing, and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. Nothing but trees and darkness. What the fuck? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing, just the crickets and the breeze. I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I am hearing is really what I am hearing, or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple other different directions, all different, i.e. old men, old women, even children, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing. Listened intensely to my surroundings, no laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down and in my exhausted state, I fell asleep. I wake up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, grab my rifle and listen to what they are saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise, back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me like I left all my gear in the woods that night. I grew up in an 8-bedroom farmhouse with my dad until I grew up and moved out. We always had extra rooms not being used, and because of the age of the house, plus all this extra space, there was always an eeriness, like someone looming in the shadows. If I had to get a drink in the middle of the night, I looked at the ground the whole time because I was scared of what may be looking back at me from the dark corners, rooms, and hallways. Even the windows and mirrors were avoided because I wasn't sure what I'd see looking back at me. When I was around 12 years old, I questioned why the room that used to be my nursery was locked from the outside. I didn't think it was weird before then. My dad needed a room for storage, and I figured he just wanted to keep me out. I brought it up to him one day, asking what was so important in there that he needed to keep me out, even though I was not a child anymore. Typical 12-year-old mentality. Turns out, I was not entirely correct about the lock. My dad, with a very serious demeanor, sat me down and answered my inquiry. When I was a baby, 1 to 2 years old, I slept in this nursery room on the second floor, next to my dad's room. This room was painted by my sister, especially for me, with Winnie the Pooh characters and fluffy clouds, the type of thing I think back on and appreciate. The effort and creativity were so admirable. I have a photo of me smiling at Pooh Bear on the wall while we were setting it up, but I'm not tech savvy enough to figure out how to link this photo. Anyway, I was in this nursery in my crib, again right next to my dad's room, the perfect age to be on my own. Every night, though, my dad was woken up by me scream-crying. He had raised 4 children before me, so he was not making first-time parent mistakes that would otherwise be in question. He thought it was probably the switch to being in my own room, rather than being in his room, that caused my nightly discomfort. He considered bringing my crib back into his room, but of course, the nursery was all ready to go. I had just graduated. For a while, when I cried in terror, he would come in and check on me, only to find that nothing was wrong in the sense of present stresses like temperature, diaper change, hunger or thirst, etc. He would stay with me until I fell asleep, or keep the light on to make me feel safer, and then return to his room to get some actual rest. One night, after finally having enough of my distress, he decided to camp out on the floor of my nursery to see if he could figure out what was the matter, but mostly to try and sleep through the night. This was the last time anyone slept in there. I was able to doze off now that I wasn't alone. He, on the other hand, was tossing and turning on the hardwood floor, not comfortable enough to sleep. As he lay there on the floor, mulling over the situation, boom, 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 he was jolted to his feet by a few massive blows to the floorboards beneath him, centered directly on his back, as if someone on the first floor had a battering ram aimed at the ceiling. His first instinct was to rush downstairs and check for intruders. He is a man of logic, brave, and ready to defend his family. However, when he got down there, the lights were off. There was no one downstairs. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. No sign of forced entry. No one else lived with us. Our closest neighbors were down the road a quarter mile. And why would they break in to bang on the ceiling, let alone have it mapped out where my dad would be sleeping in my nursery? And the force of the blows, this wasn't normal. After this event, my dad brought my crib back into his bedroom, and I was able to sleep without screaming or crying, beyond needing a diaper change or something normal. He got the Bible into the nursery for extra measure, and cast out any evil that may have invited itself there. He locked up that nursery and only used it for storage after that, and only went in during the daytime. To this day, that old lock is still on the door, as if a lock will keep spirits locked in. Short of pretending that experience never happened, he couldn't rationalize it enough to do anything else. We think that the entity was evil and malicious, and when my dad tried protecting me, this only made it pissed off. As I grew up in that house, I had a hard time sleeping in any room on my own. Many nights, I ended up rushing to the couch in the living room, turning the TV on and watching Disney till I fell asleep. But even then, I was not comfortable. There were always eyes on me, There were many more unexplained events from the farmhouse, but this was the most direct encounter with evil my dad has ever had. Please show your support by subscribe to our YouTube channel and like the video. This really helps us a lot. I upload daily horror stories, so make sure to press the bell icon.